Hi, and welcome back to Animals 2 by 2, where we take a week-long look at different animals. This is the fifth day or fifth lesson on our snails review. We are going to be looking at those snails in greater detail today and reviewing the things that we've learned for the week. As always, at the end of this week or the last lesson, I hope that you guys have observed the structure and behavior of land snails in a terrarium, observe the structure and behavior of water snails in an aquarium, that you're able to communicate your observations of the two kinds of snails, that you can compare the similarities and differences of the two kinds of snails, that you can make observations of the natural world and know that they are descriptors collected using the five senses. Use these five senses as tools to make careful observations describing objects in terms of number, shape, texture, size, weight, color, motion, and compare your observation with others, either family members or friends. And as always, I hope that you're raising those questions about the natural world, using appropriate reference material to support your understanding to obtain information. What you'll need. So during the week, we've looked at some of our handouts, and yesterday or the last lesson you tuned into, you had the paper on comparing water snails and land snails. You are going to want to pull that back out today because I'm going to touch on some of those points, and you can cross-reference what you had to just make sure that you're on the right path with that. As always, pencils, crayons, markers, pens, whatever you feel comfortable writing and drawing with. If you would like, you can have a piece of paper out to take notes or draw some additional pictures on that. We'll also, at the end of the lesson, sort some shells just to see if you can identify land snail shells or aquatic snail shells. And there is a page for you to be able to draw those and just tell me how you sorted those out. So some vocabulary we've touched on throughout the week is freshwater aquatic snails, land snails, operculum, estivation, hermaphroditic, mollusk, and gastropods. Remember, you can always just refer back to this vocabulary list and or pause it to. All right, so this week we've been doing an investigation, land and water snails, and we're going to continue looking at those. We've looked at the land snail individually and the water snail or the aquatic snail individually. And we're going to do a quick review on that really quickly and then go straight into comparing those. So the aquatic snail or sea snail or water snail, they're called all different kinds of things, but the aquatic snail just means a water snail. Sea snails it's a very large group of animal, and it's really a very diverse one. There's tons there. Most snails that live in saltwater respire using a gill or gills. A few species, though, have a lung, and they're intertidal, and they are active only at low tide when they can move around in the air. These snails have tentacles, a brain, and a heart. Those are just some of the body parts that snails and soft-bodied gastropod mollusks have with an attractive rigor outer shell made mostly of calcium carbonate, and it's essential for their protection and survival. So these shells aren't there just to be pretty or be their quote home, as I've heard a lot of people say, but it's there for their protection and to keep them alive. Then we have the land snail, and the land snail are kept as pets. Not always, but some people do keep them as pets. And when you do keep them as pets, you're going to want to keep them in a terrarium with plenty of moisture and leafy greens with a tight fitted lid because they do escape very easily. The land snail, as well as the sea snails, do leave a string of mucus as they travel. That's just part of their body and how that works. The land snail and the sea snail, you'll see, have a lot in common at first glance, but when you dive in deeper, notice that they actually are more different than you had originally thought. So on the left, we have a horse conch, which is actually a sea snail. And then on the right is going to be your typical garden snail or land snail. So land and sea snails, are they separate or are they the same? Well, the short answer is no, they're not the same. Although land snails and marine or aquatic snails are technically grouped together as gastropods, bearing many similarities, they also carry some key differences that really separate them into two distinct groups. The sea snails and those that breathe air using a lung, which are what we're referring to as land snails in this excuse me, in this lesson. So, one big difference is the breathing apparatus. Sea snails breathe underwater using that gill that I referred to earlier. But those snails that breathe air, including the snail that lives on land and in fresh water, there are some that do that, they typically do not possess a gill but instead use a lung. If you look carefully and patiently at a garden snail, you'll notice a small opening near the right hand side um, in the dextral species. That's where the shell coils to the right. This is called a respiratory pore, which opens and closes to allow for air passage in and out of the lung. So you can look really closely and you see where there's the anal pore, and the correct name or the scientific name is the pneumostome or the ear pore. Pond snails have a tube-like pore which they use like a snorkel to get fresh air while they're being submerged. The triangular tentacle for some of those snails have a blood vessel that enables them to breathe for longer periods underwater. Apple snails that live in fresh water utilize a lung and a gill, and that has many advantages. When their pools get low and the oxygen levels drop, these snails actually extend their siphon and breathe using that lung. They can also leave the water for short periods to go forage for food. Land snails and even slugs can partially submerge themselves in periods of drought, but prefer to escape the water if they can. Um, some may even do so to forage for food just beneath the water surface, but they must remain or return to the land as their design and function is for terrestrial life. So, life on land. If you also look, you'll see the eyes of the land snails are also very different. You'll notice that the garden snails have movable retractable tentacles with the eyes at the tips of the upper or posterior pair. They're classified, um, well, our term, what we would say is a stalk eye snail. That's your common vocabulary for that. But the freshwater and most marine snails have fixed eyes at the base of their upper tentacles, which cannot retract. Depending upon the species, they can have a thread-like tentacle that you could also see in like the apple snail, and some triangular and broad, as in the great pond snail. So the snails, while they look a lot alike in many, many ways, they are actually very different in some of their makeup, especially when it comes to their lungs or gills and the way that they actually. So if you want to go ahead and get that last worksheet out that you received on Monday, that's going to be page 16, and it should be on the back, hopefully, of the page 15 where you were comparing the snails. And it just says, how did you sort the shells? So what I want you to do is I want you to look at these pictures. I just have them mixed up. Some are from land snails, some are from sea snails, and let's see how much you actually paid attention. Remember, you're drawing for you. We're not worried about it being perfect. Just trying your very best. And then on the bottom, I really want you to just write me something. What did you observe that made you think that? Why do you think that these are sea snails and the others are land snails? Just give me a little description about that. What you really thought about that. If you would like to pause the video and do so now, you may. If you want to rewind the video or go back and look at some of the other pictures or even go into the other lessons, or hopefully you've been taking notes and you can refer to them, please do so now. And then when you're ready, I want you to go ahead and start the video again and let's look. Okay, so I've already categorized these for you, so I want you guys to go ahead and check yours against this. On the left side, we have our sea snail shells. And you'll see that the top ones are kind of cone-like. They're going to be a little longer as compared to the land snails, which looks more like the typical pictures we see. And on the bottom, that bottom left-hand sea snail really looks like some of the comps that we see at our beaches and things like that. So one way you could have sorted and classified was by sea snail or aquatic snail or land snail shells. You could have also categorized them by definite stripes, length, height, all kinds of different ways to classify those. But it is very important that you're able to identify the difference between the sea snails and the land snails. Okay, so stay tuned. Come back next week where we're going to take a look at the wonderful world of worms. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Can't wait to see you next week.